of the King's coronation this weekend. Overnight, the King and Queen hosting a garden party at Buckingham Palace.
One of the many guests, distinguished Australian soldier.
If you've been hearing whispers online that Camilla is being quietly pushed out of her role by the King's side, we need to talk about what's actually happening on the ground, because the real story is almost the opposite of the rumor, and honestly, it tells you something more interesting about where Camilla's position really stands. This is one of those rumors that spreads fast precisely because it sounds plausible. Royal power shifts quietly, titles get reassigned, roles get restructured without a formal announcement. So, when a headline claims Charles has stripped Camilla of a public duty, a lot of people believe it instantly, because that kind of quiet reshuffling really does happen inside this institution. Problem is, in this specific case, it simply didn't. Let's set the scene. 2026 has been one of the busiest garden party seasons Buckingham Palace has hosted in years. And at every single one of them, Camilla hasn't just been present, she's been standing right next to Charles as co-host, exactly as she has for years. If you're new to this channel, hit subscribe. We break down what's actually happening inside the royal family multiple times a week, and it's a lot more interesting than the rumor mill. And if you're already here, tap that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more royal watchers like you. Now let's get into it. The season kicked off on May 6th, 2026, and the date wasn't random. That first garden party landed exactly on the 3rd anniversary of Charles's coronation. Camilla stood beside him at the top of the palace steps in a pale blue coat dress as the pair walked down together to greet guests. She wasn't a guest at her own husband's milestone. She was co-hosting it, the same role she's held since the day he became king. Picture that moment for a second. Thousands of guests on the palace lawn, nurses, veterans, charity volunteers, the people this entire tradition exists to honor, and the king and queen, walking down together, side by side, on the exact anniversary of his coronation. If the palace had wanted to quietly signal a change in Camilla's standing, that is precisely the moment they would have avoided. Instead, it's the moment they leaned into. Joining them that day were Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, senior working royals who show up for these events because they matter to the institution. If Camilla's position had genuinely been quietly downgraded behind the scenes, this is exactly the kind of high-visibility, family-wide event where that shift would show. It didn't. She was front and center. 6 days later, on May 12th, Charles and Camilla were back at it, hosting the 3rd garden party of the season, this time joined by the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester. Reporting from that event even noted something worth pointing out. This year's garden party calendar was more condensed and more packed than usual, meaning more events crammed into a shorter stretch. If anyone were being deliberately sidelined from these duties, a busier calendar would be the easiest possible moment to quietly do it. Fewer events, less visibility, easier to explain away. Instead, Camilla's presence stayed constant across the entire run. That detail matters more than it might seem at first. A packed schedule is exactly when an institution trims the fat, when it decides who's essential and who isn't. Camilla didn't get trimmed. She got busier, right alongside the king, at every single stop. Then in June, the royal calendar shifted north to Scotland for what's known as Royal Week, or Holyrood Week. On June 30th, 2026, Charles and Camilla, again, together, welcomed more than 8,000 guests to the garden party at the Palace of Holyroodhouse, joined by Princess Anne and the Duke of Edinburgh. This is a role Camilla has now held consistently, season after season, year after year, since Charles became king. 8,000 guests is not a small, quiet gathering you can slip someone out of unnoticed. It's one of the largest single royal engagements of the year, covered extensively by Scottish and national press, photographed from every angle. There is simply no version of this event where Camilla's role could be quietly reduced without it being immediately, publicly obvious. So where does the rumor even come from? Understanding that actually tells you something important about how misinformation spreads in this niche. A title like Charles strips Camilla of hosting duties is built to exploit exactly the kind of narrative people already want to believe. That tension between Camilla and other family members, particularly around legacy and public standing, must be escalating behind palace walls. It's a compelling story. It's just not a true one, at least not based on anything documented. That doesn't mean there's nothing real to talk about here. There's a genuinely interesting story buried underneath the fake headline, and it's this. Why has Camilla's public role actually solidified, rather than shrunk? Part of the answer is simply time. Camilla has now been queen consort for over 3 years. In royal terms, that's long enough for a role to move from new and being tested to established and expected. Early in her time as queen, every public appearance carried a bit of scrutiny. How would she be received? How would she compare? Would the public accept her fully in that position? 3 years and dozens of garden parties later, that question has largely been answered by simple repetition. She shows up. She does the job. It's no longer a story in itself that she's there, which, ironically, is probably part of why some content creators feel they need to invent drama to keep the topic interesting. Part of the answer is also structural. Garden parties are one of the most consistent, tradition-bound events in the royal calendar, a custom dating back to the 1860s, designed specifically to let the monarch personally thank people for public service. NHS workers, members of the armed forces, volunteers, charity organizers. It's not a ceremonial role built around personal popularity contests. It's built around the office of the monarch and, by extension, the office of the consort standing beside him. Camilla's presence there isn't really a referendum on how the public feels about her. It's simply what the role requires, and she's fulfilled it consistently. There's also a detail that royal watchers who follow this closely will recognize: Camilla's choices. At these events, her outfits, her jewelry, have increasingly leaned on pieces with real royal history behind them. At the May 12th garden party, she wore the Queen Mother's Cartier palm leaf brooch, a piece made in 1938 using diamonds from the Queen Mother's own collection. Small detail, but it's the kind of choice that signals someone settling into an established role. Rather than someone whose position is under threat, you don't reach for pieces tied to royal legacy and continuity if your position inside that legacy is genuinely shaky. Jewelry in this family has always functioned as a quiet form of messaging, arguably one of the oldest forms of royal communication there is. Older even than the televised interview or the palace press release. Choosing a piece with the Queen Mother's history attached to it at a public event isn't a random styling decision. It's a signal of continuity, deliberately worn where cameras will catch it. Now, does any of this mean Camilla's position is universally loved or free of scrutiny? Of course not, and we're not going to pretend otherwise. Public opinion on Camilla has always been more divided than it is for other senior royals, largely because of the well-documented history. Everyone already knows that scrutiny is real and it's fair to cover. But scrutiny and rumor are two different things. Being discussed critically is not the same as being stripped of duties by the king, and conflating the two is exactly how misinformation spreads in this space. It's worth separating those two threads clearly, because a lot of channels in this niche deliberately blur them. Legitimate scrutiny, questions about legacy, about public opinion, about how history will remember this era, is fair game, and there's plenty to explore there honestly. Inventing a headline that simply isn't true is a different thing entirely, and it's the difference between commentary and misinformation. What's actually happening is much less dramatic, but honestly, in its own way, more telling. A 3-year pattern of consistent, joint public appearances. A packed 2026 calendar that, if anything, has kept Camilla more visible, not less. A role that's moved from being tested to being simply expected. That's not a scandal. That's what institutional stability inside the monarchy actually looks like, which, ironically, might be the least clickbait, true story you'll hear about Camilla all year. So that's the real story, not a palace shakeup, but 3 years of quiet, consistent routine. That tells you more about where Camilla actually stands than any invented headline ever could. What do you think? Does that surprise you? Or did you already suspect the rumor was overblown? Let me know in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you want more fact-checked breakdowns like this instead of the fabricated stuff floating around, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.